Hello, am I audible?
You are audible.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so today Quinton is not available, and I know about that. Shashi would be joining in a short while, and if everybody else required is there, we can start.
Yeah, I think we're probably a quorum.
Okay. I hadn't had the chance to look at the agenda or set up any agenda for today, but last meeting I remember we basically wanted to relook at our release or possibility of our release in this week or next week, whenever it is, and that might be the main discussion pointers for today.
Yeah, so Maru, do you want to give an update on the migration to KubeBuilder? That's probably the most salient thing to start talking about with regard to this.
So we have, I think most of the work is done. The catch has been setting up a Kube 111 cluster to be able to test against. Like the CI is passing for like a managed cluster, test managed cluster, but I'm like, oh, I have to actually set up a real cluster because Kube, Docker, and Docker cluster does not work with 111 in my setup. I think it's actually something to do with Docker, but I haven't used Docker and Docker in a while. Minikube is not supporting 111, so it's like, okay, I have to go and figure out how to actually deploy Kube for reals on real VMs or something, which to me is just like a huge burden. But that to me is like what needs to be done. We know that things work in testing. We don't know that they work on a real cluster. If there's gotchas due to controller interaction, we have to figure that out. I'm tempted to say we could, I don't know. Right now I'm kind of stuck on, do we merge this? It's a huge thing. The tests are passing, modulo, Huawei's approval of the changes to your code, for the code that you've been maintaining. I think that's fine, but it does break people's ability to deploy until verify that 111 works. We update the README and everything else. So how do people feel about this transition point and how we should move forward?
So for me, I would say I think we need a couple folks to do a manual test and make sure they can deploy it on like a real Kube cluster. I'm happy to be one of those people. We can also, like we have some experience so far at Red Hat deploying Federation V2 and having it work with basically arbitrary cubes. So we can definitely offer up that kind of testing. Irfan and Shashi, I think that you folks at Huawei probably want to do some manual testing on your own before we decide to merge it. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds logical to me. However, I think I did communicate about this, that we wouldn't be able to work this week on any of this. So I had a brief look on the PR today, and no way like brief was really brief. I guess we can spend some time now having a more deeper look at what are the changes. I think it's mainly in the infrastructure, and there might not be many comments, but just to have a look at it and understand what's going around, it will be a benefiting exercise for us. And secondly, yes, we can do that. We can try to set it up, and maybe as Maru mentioned, the managed thing sort of works in his testing. We can try to do the same, set up our clusters and try to see if it works or not. But my pointer would be that ideally, I think we did set this as a precursor. I'm not saying that Maru necessarily has to do that particular amount of work, but our proper, at least integration test passing on its own might be prerequisite to have the PR merged. Or we
Yes,
can,
that's where we are now, Irfan, and we're trying to determine whether we want to get a higher degree of certainty before we do that. That's the conversation we're trying to have right now. Like the CI tests work, but we know that the CI tests are very simple and don't necessarily, like, they don't exercise working with a real cluster that pre-exists outside the life of the test, right?
correct,
So
correct.
I think the same tests are run in both integration and non-integration. The difference is that an unmanaged deployment will have like it'll be more representative kube control plane. It'll have things like namespace controller, which we've had interactions with in the past, and deployment and replica set controllers. So that's really the catch, is we don't have a good way of running that integration. We need an actual deployment to validate that interaction.
So I think we can probably take a week, and I agree that it might take us some time to actually set up E2E kind of environment for this, where real clusters are being used. So we can
It can
take
be
a call.
local. The suggestion isn't that we create an automated E2E like job. Like, we do want
Mhm.
that, but I don't think that's a blocker. It's more like, can we reliably like set something up and have it work locally? And is it reproducible? Like, that's the key for me. And that's why, to me, it's kind of problematic that we don't have a lightweight solution like Minikube to validate against, because
Mm.
for all intents and purposes, that is representative for the purposes of federation. And we just don't have that yet.
So it seemed like when you were explaining, Maru, about what you did try, it seemed like you did try didn't. What is the blocker you did face with Minikube? Like, I remember that we had this discussion that one of the directions, or one of the branch directions we can try to set up this test, is that we can have local Minikube clusters, say 2 clusters in the current setup that we have in the Travis CI setup itself, and that might be sufficient for us. Like, it might not be able to test whatever that Shashi's DNS kind of stuff, but most of it might be testable against those clusters.
Yeah, I mean, getting Docker and Docker might work. I've just my current experience trying to get Docker and Docker working is it doesn't actually work on my system. I spent a lot of time just having to upgrade to the latest version of Docker, figuring out like how kubeadm Docker and Docker cluster, like how to set the right flags to get that running at least. But then when it tries to run, it can't actually run my controller manager. Like, it dies, and it
No,
looks like it's a Docker problem. So I'm saying, like,
I'm not.
I can't do it locally, so the idea of doing it in CI just seems like a stretch. Like, I think we need to be
Correct,
able.
correct. So I know that this DIND has been evolving and evolving. I mean, it doesn't stabilize at a point of time. So we also had same problems. Like, it works at some point of time, later it does not work, and we have to follow up what's happening in their repo. What I
The
was saying
ultimate.
is, like, what's the problem with just spinning off Minikube cluster? Is it too heavy? Like, because
So
uh,
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about this, but we need Cube 111 to be able to
oh,
test.
okay,
It's
okay,
the
okay,
only
okay,
thing that has support for sub resources the way we need them, and
correct.
Minikube doesn't support
Might not have
111.
that yet. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It
so that's
follows the
still in
case of that.
process. So we have to sort of kludge together some like 111 solution, and it may actually just involve real clusters, because none of the tooling for local clusters
Hmm.
seems for me.
So
Okay.
I've just found a Minikube pull request that is called Fix Kubernetes 1.11. So it seems
In
like
process.
people in Minikube are already working on this.
Yeah, like, it's not so much like that we're not going to get there. It's just that this is a blocker in the near term, and until they, I mean, I'm looking at that same PR and none of the checks are passing. So it's like, okay, well, they're working on it. It's not there yet.
So how about this proposal? Like, I have a suggestion. So like we did decide that we would try to cut out a release end of June, any which ways. I mean, that's what I remember. And not keeping any of the features as necessary prerequisite for that particular release. So does it sound like not acceptable that whatever shape the already merged PRs are or already merged features are in and whatever is the mechanism of deployment, like the README suggests that if you want to deploy this, you have to follow these steps. It has a user README which gives you steps to set it up, and probably we might also need to add a little bit of feature readmes that if you want to use this feature, you have to do this. If you want to use that feature, you have to do that kind of stuff. And then we do this release cycle weekly. So and prioritize, like having a E2E or this kind of a setup is a sort of a necessity for us. We need to have a dependency on 1.11, which is also a necessity for movement to CRD. So if it gets finished in the next week, then we have the proper setup for CRD, and we can release the, say, alpha.0 this week, alpha.1 next week, or maybe in 2 weeks, whatever that might be.
I
It
think for me,
sounds doable.
I think CRDs are, I think they're mandatory for alpha. So to me, there's kind of the chain of, we don't want to ship something that doesn't use CRDs because it'll be confusing to switch. So the switch to Queue Builder, I think, is, that's something we need for alpha. And then dependency is, okay, well, we need to be able to actually deploy this. We need to be able to have a Cube 111 cluster, deploy it, and have the test pass. So these, to me, are like blockers for an alpha release, and everything else is optional. So I don't think that, like, we said we want to release by the end of June initially, but really it became we want to release once Cube 111 is available. To my mind, like, I wouldn't want to necessarily say, yeah, here's Federation, and the only way you can test it is you have to deploy a real cluster. Like, we spent some time, like, at Summit and otherwise, making sure it was possible to do on Minikube, because that's a really lightweight, like, entry point for someone who wants to kick the tires on this. But in my mind, like, I think we can basically tie our release to Minikube 111 being available. So that we have, we have a README that someone can follow. And it's not that people won't be able to consume it before we have it, but I think to me, that's like the minimum bar for an alpha.
Yeah, so I'll just add, like, on a totally different note, like so Lindsay and I started working on the exercise of, like, make it possible to deploy what's currently in master without having the dev tooling, like the API server builder tooling and stuff like that. And we stopped once we got to the point when we realized that if we need to deploy an aggregated API server, we're going to have to generate SSL certs so that we can serve TLS to the API aggregator, which is, like, I mean, it's not an insurmountable problem, but it means that we're going to introduce, like, additional complications. Like, we would definitely need to have a script or something like that that deployed it. And that seems like a fair amount of work to do, especially when it seems, from where I'm personally sitting right now, like the Cube Builder refactor is just around the corner. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure it would be an investment that would pay a whole lot of dividends. And then I've also just had a lot of experience where people are like, well, I don't want to operate storage to give to this thing, so I'm not even going to bother with it when it comes to an aggregated API server. So my bias would probably be towards waiting, but, like, if I also don't want to, like, introduce a problem if it's really particularly critical, people think, to get a release, an initial alpha release out. You know, I certainly would be open to talking about that, but I think my own personal bias would be towards let's try to get the Cube Builder stuff wrapped up, and that will simplify the eventual deployment that we ask people to do, like orders of magnitude easier. What do you think?
Sounds logical. Sounds logical, Paul. So we have two, I mean, strong points. Like Maru suggested that there is a difference in usability if we really give a release right now, and then users consume it, and then after some time we shift the infrastructure to CRD. There might be a slight confusion in terms of usability. And what you're saying is that it seems like a futile exercise to actually set it up a release kind of an environment, and then possible release which with some steps for users to set it up using whatever mechanism you were trying to set up. Both of them are points which suggest that it might be useful to wait and do a CRD based release.
Yeah, honestly, I think that if we absolutely positively had to get something into a release like today, I would say that probably means we're looking at building a Helm chart, because Helm is fairly widely available and can do the SSL certificate generation stuff that we need to do. But I would not want to go down that road unless we felt like we absolutely had to, and it doesn't sound like we feel that way based on what I'm hearing right now.
I'm not sure Helm solves that problem. I mean, we've tried and failed, I think, with cluster registry for that reason, and had to build a tool, and same with Federation. Like there's some sort of two-step around service provisioning that precludes using Helm at this point. That said, I mean, I'm not suggesting, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say that, so the specific issue that we ran into conceptually with cluster registry is that there was a mode of deploying cluster registry where like the CR init binary created a load balancer service and then had to wait for the service to get an external IP. And Helm can't do that, but I don't think that that is a requirement for how we would need to, or I don't think that we would have the same requirement, at least for like an initial alpha release of Federation. But you're right, Helm can't wait for, like, Helm can't do that kind of workflow where you deploy a service, it waits for something to happen to that service, and then it deploys other resources. Helm can't do that.
So on the topic of deployment, I mean, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with Cube Builder, but it definitely sidesteps the requirement to have the dev tools, provided that we commit the install YAML and point it at the canonical image. And that way, it's a simple matter of like, here's a YAML file, like you can distribute it however you want, and all you got to do is apply this to your cluster and you'll have Federation.
Yeah, that's similar to how, for example, like Istio releases are deployed. For Istio, you literally do like a kube control apply from a URL, which, you know, you don't have to use a URL. You can download the file, but there's basically a static YAML file that deploys everything you need. That to me is a very attractive way to deploy, and like what's really facilitating that is not so much Cube Builder as it is that we're using CRDs. So we don't have this problem of we've got to have a distinct API server that can serve TLS to the aggregator, which just makes the whole shebang like much, much easier to deploy. And as long as I have the bully pulpit, I will just like say also one reason why, and I say this as a great proponent of aggregated API servers, why CRDs are fundamentally superior to aggregated API servers. UF.
So for me, moving forward, I need to spend time, I guess. I just need a Cube 111 like cluster. I don't really care how I get it. I haven't really done this in a while, and I usually find it takes a certain amount of friction of actually deploying a cluster, just because of all the infrastructure and all the things that can go wrong. But who knows? Maybe it can be something that Kubecorn or like any of these other deployment tools that I haven't touched. Maybe they'll make it easy. But if I can find a way to do it, or somebody else can find a way to do it that's reproducible by anybody else, then I think we're good to go. And we can, I mean, parallel to this, I mean, updating the docs and the README for this new sort of state of the world is probably something that can be done while we're making sure it actually works. And to me, those are the two things that we need pre-release, and everything else can happen like in subsequent alpha releases. Does that make sense? Is that a no? Is that a yes?
Hey, sorry, I need to take a break of 5 minutes. I'll be back. Apologies, sir.
Okay.
All right, somebody hum hold music while Irfan takes a break.
Is there any particular deployment mechanism that someone has experience with that they like? I pretty much hate all deployment mechanisms, but I'm just a hateful person. So.
Sorry, deployment of what?
Kubernetes.
I personally like to live dangerously, so I build from master and I use local up cluster.
Ugh. Man, I hate VMs, but I guess maybe that's the way to do it.
I'm putting some feelers out, by the way, to people who might be able to tell me when 111 will land in the public clouds.
Do you know anyone who's involved with Minikube development?
I don't, but I'm gonna try to find somebody.
I mean, I don't know who's responsible for that, like SIG-wise. I just want to like a tentative date on when they expect to have a version that supports 111.
That is a very good question that I'm not immediately sure what the answer to is.
Okay. Because ideally, like I said, we'd coordinate release of Federation with that. So we would have documentation that says, use Minikube. Make sure you use this version. It won't work with other versions. If we did today, we'd be like, yeah, we have something. Make sure you deploy manually with local up cluster, which kind of, to me, defeats the purpose of having like a kubectl apply like installation if you have to deploy your cluster painfully. It's not really an easy thing.
All right, I see one person that is supposedly a maintainer who I know, so I'm gonna see if I can reach out to him, but I'm not sure how active he's been.
Well, I mean, at the least if you can figure out the chain of responsibility in a SIG, so you can maybe show up and ask.
Sorry guys, I had some disturbance outside my door.
Am I audible back again?
Yep. Also, Maru, there was one more issue with the Minikube, right? The profile issue, so which prevented us from upgrading the Minikube version, right?
If you're running multiple, if you want to do multiple clusters, like to be honest, like, yeah, we want to do multiple clusters. I'm more concerned about the controller interaction than multiple clusters, but it is a good point. It probably needs to be covered.
That issue seems to be open since some time, right? A couple of months now.
So is it still open? maybe we're gonna have to force that getting fixed then, because it's gonna be
Yeah.
kind of hard. So,
No, actually,
Seems
I
like a
didn't
pretty
bother
obvious.
about that earlier, and because that this thing works prior to Minikube release two, I mean that 2.25.0 or something like that. So I was just using an older version that works, and there was no prerequisite of having newer clusters like now we have.
Oh, okay. We should be documenting these. What are the blockers for alpha? We can start knocking that.
Okay, I've sent an email asking about Minikube 1.11 support to the maintainer that I know. I'll let folks know as I have some information.
Sure.
You after me.
Okay, and did I miss something like while I was not at my desk?
Yeah, nothing much, I believe.
Okay.
The two things most on my mind are EDB testing on unmanaged clusters, Minikube supporting 111 and profiles. I guess the other one that, oh, darn, it was just in my head. Oh yeah, something I was talking about with Paul, with the move of cluster registry to have namespace clusters. I think we need to move federated cluster to being namespace as well. And so they would probably exist in the same place with the secrets for authorizing, for like authenticating against those clusters in the Federation system namespace. I think we want to do that pre-alpha, just because the switch from namespace to non-namespace is kind of problematic. I don't think we want to do that. Does it make sense? It's a relatively simple change. It just means an API. It's definitely a breaking API change.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that seems like logical to update then. And I'm not sure what is the version of cluster registry that is being used in integration tests.
It'll be
Is there any dependency?
0.0.5. It'll be 0.0.5 after QBuilder refactor lands.
I think it'll be 006. Someone was commenting on that because I just basically used dep and it just pulled in the latest release version, which I think is 006.
Okay.
Clearly, I don't know what I'm talking about.
I mean, unless that's a problem, but I kind of assume like now that cluster registry is a CRD, we don't really care which version we're running. We'll just run whatever's latest. It's an API thing at this point. It's not code compatibility.
Okay.
So one thing that I wanted to bring up is it's been a little while since we talked about like policy support. I'm interested in dusting off that discussion and maybe talking about it in a approaching Federation working group meeting. I think Quinton is probably just as interested as he always was, but I'd love to touch base with folks about if people are thinking about policy. I've had some time to think about it while we've been doing kind of the bread and butter stuff of getting this project spun up, and I have some ideas, but I'm not 100% sure if they'll be useful or they are good ideas. But I have some ideas that I'd be happy to talk about. Probably today is not a great time to do it since we don't have a lot of people, but maybe in the next couple weeks we can dust that discussion off.
I'd vote
We can do
for
that.
once we have alpha out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I think
and
alpha is about. Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead, Manu.
I'm just going to say that once we have alpha out, to me, that's kind of baseline for the primitives. And I think policy is going to be like interacting at a higher level, but it'll be dependent on those primitives. So that's all. Go ahead, Irfan.
Yeah, what I was saying is that I think we already had one, like post alpha, we have some other pointers also to talk about. Uh, uh, I think that was having a layer, usability layer on top of the Federation API someday. And now what Paul mentioned. So we can add these to either an issue in GitHub or someplace trackable so that we don't lose them once we have the release.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll just say, like, as long as we're talking about things we're interested in doing post alpha, like I've already created an issue for this. Maru and I have talked about this a fair amount. Like, we think that it should be possible for you to run a like make a CR, make a resource that indicates that another resource should be federated, and have a controller that generates new CRDs for you based on like an input resource, so that you can automatically federate other resources that Federation doesn't know about yet, in a way that is easy to do and does not require you to know a lot about the details of how that's done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure whether that would be something we want to have dry run support for first. But yeah, I think that's definitely useful. The only catch around that is, like, we're going to get away from generated clients, as I think I mentioned Irfan on your PR. So it's no longer going to be necessary for a co-generator to look at a type and generate listers and from those clients, whatever. However, the one catch about CRDs, if we just generate them dynamically in the API, is there's no type support. Like, I don't know how that fits. Anyway, sorry, we're getting distracted.
Yeah, but correct pointers. Like, we need to have a look at that also. Yeah. Okay, so I suggest, so you mentioned these are the blockers, like these basically are the items which we need to take up or follow with the community. Like the support in Minikube for 1.11 might need to be followed with the community, right? So does it make sense to assign sort of owners to this so the individual person can track or do that item? Like that might be some support in movement to Cube Builder.
Yeah. I mean, having ownership of these things so that we're moving them forward and we have status updates and stuff, I think that's pretty important.
Yeah.
So I think, like, in terms of the Cube Builder PR, I think there's a dependency on Irfan, Shashi, like making sure that the changes I've made to their code make sense to them.
Yes.
The E2E testing, I think I guess I'm just going to follow Paul's suggestion and just use local up cluster as much as I had that experience with that in the past. But if other people want to use other deployment mechanisms, I mean, getting familiar with the new Cube Builder way of doing things, I think I may not have updated. I've been working with the deployment and deletion scripts to round trip stuff. I'll put that, make sure that's in the PR so that you can use it. I mean, the goal is that you can do exactly what you would do in, like, with API Server Builder. You could run, like, you know, delete Federation and deploy Federation, and it'll basically, like, clean up the cluster, redeploy it, and then you can run the E2E test after that. I'm not sure if anybody else has been doing that, but for me, I guess that's my pattern for making sure that things are working. The hope would be is that whoever has the ability to deploy a 111 cluster can, you know, check what I've been doing and make sure I'm not missing anything. And if we can get that done, that that to me would say we can merge that PR.
So I have a couple of questions, Maru. So you mentioned that you did try the latest DIND. When you say that, I am assuming you are referring to the Cube ADM DIND cluster. The repo name is that, I guess, right?
Correct.
So is there any, I mean, any pattern or any specific point that you could list out, like maybe there is an issue or there is uh, an open issue in that repo which might need to be followed up, and it might be easier to do that, or it was like you figured that it just doesn't work and then you didn't dig deeper?
So first off, and I'll post something in the chat, this is the invocation that I had to laboriously discover. And the first two options are default, but not using the host Docker's daemon JSON file, skipping the snapshot, and setting the appropriate feature gates. By default, it sets mount propagation, but it doesn't set custom resource sub-resources. So that's just to get the cluster up and running. And then I have problems that I think are related to, like Docker and Docker is very dependent on how you configure the host Docker. And I think there's some problem there, and I don't know if I have the patience to try to figure it out. There's just a lot of moving pieces. I'm just kind of remembering, if you haven't worked with Docker and Docker on a sustained basis, it's really easy to lose all the details and make it a viable solution. Like the only reason I was suggesting that we consider using Docker and Docker for CI/CD is that test infra is maintaining a solution that they're doing the work. So, as you know, maybe it would be harder to reproduce locally, but in terms of running tests on test infra maintained cluster, that should work. And if it doesn't, then that group will actually devote resources to fixing it. Whereas with this, it's like, oh, Docker and Docker doesn't work on your machine. Sorry, you don't have a lot of recourse. You basically have to just self-support, because every machine is different. Every operating system and Docker interaction is different. Every mount propagation, configuration is different. It's just like, it's super complicated. So as much as I'm not a lover of VM-based clusters, because there's so many things that can go wrong, I think Docker and Docker is arguably even worse. It hurts me to say that, because I really like lightweight clusters, but the complexity
it's very lightweight actually.
is considerable. So.
Yes.
I encourage you to try. Like I had to jump through a lot of hoops just to get Docker working. The challenge for me was that Kube Builder uses multi-stage builds in order to test that the binaries it's committing to an image are working. And that uses a newer version of Docker than I've ever used before. I've just been using a stable old version, and that you can't use that with the Kube Builder image, or Docker file rather. So you may or may not run into that same thing depending on how new your version of Docker is. I believe multi-stage builds are a 1.17 feature, and they're on 1.18, so it's pretty recent.
Okay. Second was, what's the kind of VM that we basically provision for tests in the Travis CI as of now? I mean, I didn't go and inspect the scripts, or maybe I'm not well aware of Travis that much.
Yeah, I'm not super aware either. I think probably Paul is a resident expert, because they use that for service catalog as well.
So we don't provision a cluster in Travis.
No, okay, go ahead. Maybe you finish, then I'll ask.
Yeah, we don't currently provision a Kube cluster in Travis.
No, that was not my question. I was asking what is the size of the VM. I believe there is one VM that we provision in Travis, or it's auto provision, whichever way, based on the Travis script that you write.
Yeah, I don't think
on which the tests run.
I don't think that we provision a VM, but you can get a VM to run your Travis jobs. And you have a lot more control over what you can do with the VM flavor of Travis rather than the flavor that runs in a container.
Okay.
The trade-off is that the VM flavor takes like significantly longer to start than the container one. So the normal start latency for a container is like under 5 seconds, and the normal start latency for the VM flavor of Travis is like 50 seconds or a minute. So that's basically like the trade-off. Does that answer your question, Irfan?
Yeah, that does. Why I did ask it because um, I believe we are still thinking of running these jobs in Travis, right? And not trying to use the test infra based jobs as of now.
So
Like
you're not trying to use what?
So we have another option of trying to use the test infra setup. Like we can define jobs in E2E jobs or integration jobs or whatever that is, and utilize the current K-test infrastructure, which is managed by the test infra team.
Yeah, that is definitely an option that I think that we should look at, so that we can have some more realistic scenarios covered by our CI tests. With all that said, like it's fairly unclear to me now, and by unclear I mean I really haven't done that much investigation. I am not aware off the top of my head whether you can get multiple cube clusters delivered to you at the same time by test infra, so that we could do something like get 3 clusters from test infra and do things to them with Federation.
We only need 2 clusters, and that should be doable with their Docker and Docker.
Actually, like this brings me to this memory. Like we already have a couple of jobs in test infra. I mean, maybe we should delay this discussion to after alpha or some other time. Yeah, what was coming to my mind is that for Federation V1, we had quite a good amount of resources reserved for Federation V1. So there were 3 or 4, I think at least 3 different versions of K-test that we were testing, and there were jobs for them. I really don't have the exact right idea what is the status of them, but as far as I understand, they should not be removed abruptly. If they were being removed, we would get a notice or something like that. So we can reutilize that for V2, like categorically migrate one and then the next and next job to be of utility to V2.
But I mean, well.
Yeah, I get your point, Varun. Like, I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do as of now, or maybe in future also. So maybe we can just delay this discussion for some other time when we have maybe.
I don't think there's a fundamental difference between a cluster deployed in Docker versus not for Federation. Like we're validating the control plane. We're not really validating like the lower level kubelet and whether it's using Docker and Docker or real Docker. I don't really think that's relevant. So the advantage would be is rather than having to spin up a whole bunch of VMs and take an awful lot of time, you spin up a cluster within a pod on the test cluster. And that would, here's one cluster, here's another pod, that's another cluster. And for all intents and purposes, the same code would be running as on like a cluster with a bunch of VMs underpinning it. At a much lower cost, which, I mean, we might have those resources reserved today. I'm not sure we can count on them going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was just trying to think aloud for the current dependencies that we have. We don't have a readily available 1.11 cluster.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think that'll change very quickly. It's just we're on a lag between. I don't. We
Yeah,
actually.
I realize that. I realize that, and I think we need not be discussing this. Let's just move ahead.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So uh, that was. I had one more question, I guess. So yeah. So the question was about this. So if we want to continue, so Maru, when you mentioned that, you mentioned something like the test infra guys also might be supporting this Docker and Docker setup, right? So how does that look like? Is that usable, or it's already like in some jobs, or that might be one of us that might be the first users or consumers of that?
I don't. I haven't been following the status. Like the code is in the test info tree, and that was like a considerable amount of effort from some Google folks to get that working. I would presume that it's working. And it would continue to, because there was a general ask to reduce the cost of end-to-end testing for Cube, and Docker in a single Kubernetes pod was one of the ways that they were intending to do that.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I'll post a link in if anyone wants to investigate. I'm not really considering a high priority to investigate until we get that out for myself. And
Okay, so then what might be your best suggestion to proceed towards alpha? Uh, Given a situation like Minikube not necessarily comes up with a solution to that 1.11, and the doc didn't work. The last option that might remain to us is at the beginning of the meeting we were talking about, we can validate at multiple sites maybe using a managed cluster setup, right?
yeah, I mean, I'm not considering automated E2E as a blocker, but I do think it needs to be reproducible so that each one of us has the ability to run them locally.
Okay, that sounds like a reasonable thing to do as of now to me.
Yeah, I mean, so long as you can get a 111 cluster, I haven't been able to do that myself, so I can't guarantee that there aren't bugs that are latent. But we'll see. It shouldn't be that hard to fix. I just need a cluster to investigate. I would expect that I could get to that.
So Irfan, do you want to? Should we touch base like Monday? Because we might have more information then about the Minikube situation.
So this is what I can try. So I can try. I can try on my end also to set up or spin up a 111 cluster and see where I reach, and we can touch base again on Monday. Does that sound reasonable?
That sounds reasonable. Yeah.
I would almost suggest that we just set up like daily status meetings so we get this alpha out. It doesn't have to be exhaustive, but just like, is there anything just like a scrum? Like, is there anything blocking us? What's the status? You know, just to speed things along.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. Once a week is certainly not often enough.
Is there a time that would work for everyone? And by everyone, I guess I'm mostly speaking of you two and us on the Red Hat side. Everybody else is welcome to join, but I think we're the key stakeholders here.
Can we delay it by an hour? Like, how does it sound? It's daytime for you, so it should be okay. Shashi, does it seem logical to you? 11 p.m.
Yeah, I think it should be fine. Either way.
So an hour later than this meeting, like that, 10:30 for me, 1:30 for you, Paul, and
Yeah, that's a good time for me.
I just don't want this meeting to be conflicting with the matches. Next week we have all the good soccer matches.
Okay.
That's my preference. We can
It's got
change
its
the time
priorities for
also.
me.
Oh, that's fine.
You can change your timings also. I was just being honest.
And just an FYI, I'm off Wednesday through Thursday, or it's like just the rest of the week, and we're off Wednesday. So my hope is we have 3 days. I think getting this PR, like getting the end-to-end test working and getting the PR merged and probably getting the federated cluster namespace, that all seems doable to me in that time frame. Getting the README and docs updated and making sure Minikube is available for 111. I think those are not things that I need to do. So my hope is I can make a push to get those 3 tasks done by the end of Tuesday, and then everyone who's still working can polish that off Thursday, Friday, or Wednesday if you're working, not in the US. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Cool.
Sounds okay.
Okay. So yeah, the hope would be is either by the end of next week or early the following week, we're in a position to release alpha, and it may be that Minikube support will be the blocker and not anything that we have control over.
Yeah, let's keep it like this. So if we have a 1.11 cluster, like, or either of us have a 1.11 cluster, and it's like a reproducible step to set it up and run the E2E test or whichever test that we are talking about, and they work, then Minikube should not be a blocker for us. Sounds okay? Or
Should not be, sorry, say again?
so a dependency on Minikube should not be a blocker for us in that case.
Yeah, I guess the reason I was suggesting it could be a blocker is simply that
we specify that in the README. That's what you're saying. Like,
yeah,
setting
maybe
up
we just have to say like, sorry, Minikube isn't supported at this time. To me, it's like releasing an alpha and then you can't use Minikube is kind of like a real blocker for people who just want to kick the tires and aren't developers. So I guess it's up for debate whether you'd want to block releasing that or not.
So one thing I've been thinking about is like, I think if I remember correctly, the issue was that Open API type field isn't supported in CRDs, like in the Open API schema for CRDs when you have sub-resources, right, Maru?
Basically, when you have sub-resources, it restricts the fields you can have in the Open API schema. And I would say unnecessarily, but it just means that we try to create a cube. Sorry, so just for folks who aren't familiar with the Cube Builder, when you enable a sub-resource like status, which we use in several of the resources, and you try to create that CRD in a cube less than 111 Cube API server, it will fail validation. It will not be able to create that CRD. The reason that it's failing is not because the fields in question are actually useful. They just happen to be generated by Cube Builder. If we wanted to, we could go through, as we have already, and just remove the offending fields. I guess I'm getting lost in detail here. The TLDR is simply that we either have to manually clean up the Open API schema, or we have to use a new enough version that we can use the generated Open API.
So it might be that if it's going to take a while to get to 111 on Minikube, we should go through the exercise at Red Hat, like Maru and Lindsay, I think you're on too. We need to go through the exercise of let's try this against 110 with the offending Open API fields removed, and if that gets us a much wider and more generally available set of versions that we can run on, that might be something that we do for the initial alpha. But Maru, I think we should also see if we can get the change that relaxed those validations cherry-picked into 110. It might be profitable to do that.
I would agree with that. I am curious whether that solves the problem with profiles or not with Minikube, whether the profile supporting version of Minikube was 109 or 110.
1.9. 110 doesn't work with that profiles problem.
Oh.
I did learn the hard way.
I mean, this is only a problem if you want multiple clusters. Like for the purposes of testing, I don't think it's a huge deal, but for the purposes of actually somebody kicking the tires, it probably is a big deal. So maybe we need to. I'm kind of like, I'm going back on my idea that Minikube needed to be supported. Maybe the initial alpha version will use maybe 110 if Paul's experiment plays out. But it won't support Minikube with profiles, and people will just have to deploy real clusters until we get that resolved. But I think we should push Minikube to get the profile issue fixed. Like, we haven't really been pushing on them on that, and I think we should.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we'll at Red Hat we'll investigate the possible workaround of like if we could remove the offending Open API stuff and deploy, for example, against a 110 cluster in some public cloud. I think that would be that the expedience we'd get from that would probably be very useful. So we'll validate that and see if it works.
Sure.
Okay. Irfan, you tend to send out invites. Is that something you can do?
I have already added the point that I'll update a meeting invite for next week for every day, 11 p.m.
Okay. So yeah, I think we're at time now. I think we got lots to do. I'm definitely hoping we can get the E2E running by Monday, and then go from there. Because to me, that's the biggest stumbling block, is just getting this stuff validated.
And one more point. So we need not wait for the Monday end of day meeting, like end of day for us. You can post whatever update or anything. There is a common Slack message group I did create, right? I guess you might have that already. So just post the update, or if there is any blocker or something, or whatever.
Yeah, and I'll be updating the PR as well. And you guys all get notifications.
Obviously.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, with progress, hopefully there'll be enough notification channels that you'll know in time to be able to do work on your Monday.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a great
See you
weekend.
Monday. You too, have a good one. Bye-bye.